Good evening, class. This is Mrs. Pender Harrison. Tonight we're going to be taking notes on quote sandwiches, or in other words, your evidence, citation, and analysis. Go ahead and pause the video for a moment to set up your Cornell notes. And your essential question up at the top should be, how should I format my evidence in a body paragraph? One of the things that we will be expecting you to be able to do at this point in the 10th grade is to avoid a hit and run quote. A hit and run quote is a quote that's just dropped into the middle of a paragraph or an essay without either context or analysis that goes with it. They're like car accidents where the driver speeds away and avoids taking responsibility for the damage. In order to fix a hit and run quote, you need to have the following pieces in order to create a quote sandwich. We're going to be using this metaphor today of a sandwich in order to describe your writing. Your quote sandwich comes in three parts: the bridge, the quote and the citation, and the reasoning. Sometimes the quote and citation together is referred to as evidence, which is where we get T-bear from. Step 1 to creating your quote sandwich. You need some bread, or in this case, the bridge. Where or when in the story the quote is from, which character said or thought it, what is happening at that moment, or any other information that gives context to the quote you're about to introduce belongs at the beginning of the sentence. For example, the entire couple of sentences down here is a full quote sandwich. The portion that is in orange is the bridge. So for example, although Beowulf's protective helmet broke while fighting Grendel's mother, comma, Beowulf, and that's it. It's really only half of a sentence, but it is the context of where this quote is coming from. It's not necessarily the title of the text. It could be something much more specific, like which character is speaking or what point in the story this quote is from. Step 2. After you have your bread, now your sandwich needs some meat. And in this case, that is a metaphor for your quote and your citation. It should be a nicely sliced quote, which means that it should be short. If your quote is more than one line long, you need to seriously think about whether or not you need the entire quote piece of evidence that you have there. More than likely, it's too long. Your evidence should support the thesis statement or at least the topic sentence of the paragraph. And it needs to come between the context and the analysis or reasoning. Your quotation also needs to be punctuated correctly, and it needs to be followed by a citation. Without a citation, it is considered plagiarized. So for example, in our example quote sandwich, we have, although Beowulf's protective helmet broke while fighting Grendel's mother, comma, Beowulf, and then the part in orange is actually the quote, longed only for fame, leapt back into battle, lines 215 to 216. You'll notice that the quote comes with quotation marks and then a parenthetical citation, and also that the punctuation comes after the citation, not after the quote. So the citation is actually a part of the sentence. LN stands for line. The text that this quote is from is a poem, but if it was a novel, you would write P. for page number. Now, using the metaphor of the sandwich, every single student in this class could have the exact same bread and the exact same meat on their sandwich. But what would make it unique to you is the reasoning or the fixins or whatever it is that you put on your sandwich in addition to meat and bread. So maybe some of you like cheese, some of you don't, some of you love mayo, other people think it's disgusting. The writing or reasoning, your own opinion or response to the quote, is what makes your essay unique to you. So step 3 of creating your quote sandwich is the reasoning. This is your interpretation. It can also be an explanation of how the quote proves your point. It could describe what the quote reveals, either about a character or the writer, and this goes at the end. So if we look at our example quote sandwich, again, we have the same bridge and then quotation. After the quotation, we have 2 sentences of reasoning or analysis. This shows that Beowulf thought more about the recognition he would receive after killing Grendel's mother than the fact that he had little protection against the powerful monster. Beowulf is an example of an Anglo-Saxon epic hero because he values glory and fame, Anglo-Saxon ideals, over his own life. At this point, you really should have about 2 sentences of reasoning or analysis or interpretation or explanation after each quote. 1 sentence just isn't enough detail or elaboration at this point in high school. So putting it all together, in order to create a quote sandwich, you are going to need a bridge, your quote and citation, and your reasoning. Step 1 and step 2 should be 1 sentence combined. So this is the first half of the sentence, this is the second half. Then step 3 should be about 2 sentences. So in total, your quote sandwich should be 3 sentences. You might be asking yourself, now where do I put my quote sandwich when it comes to an essay or a body paragraph? Let's take a look. When you're writing your essay, you want to start with your thesis statement. Here's an example. In his novella Animal Farm, George Orwell describes government officials as cruel, greedy, and untrustworthy in order to support his claim that absolute power corrupts all authoritative figures. This is a level 4 thesis statement, which means that it has 3 subcategories or subclaims. George Orwell describes the government officials as cruel. He also describes them as greedy. He also describes them as untrustworthy. But it also has a rationale that in order to gives us the reason behind why George Orwell is describing government officials in this way. Sometimes that in order to could be the phrase therefore, or sometimes we see it as because. But a level 4 or an exceeds expectations thesis statement is going to have that rationale. So this thesis statement would show up in your introduction paragraph in the very beginning of your essay. Then you might have a possible topic sentence or subclaim, the beginning of a body paragraph. It might look something like this. George Orwell characterizes the pigs on Animal Farm as manipulative and dishonest to support the idea that totalitarian governments will use propaganda to brainwash their citizens. Now, words like manipulative and dishonest relate back to this claim that they are described as untrustworthy. But I don't necessarily have to use the exact same words in order to make my point. Untrustworthy, manipulative, and dishonest are all synonyms. It gives me a wider variety of vocabulary words to use. So if this is the first sentence in my body paragraph, it's my topic sentence or subclaim. Then, immediately after my topic sentence, I'm going to start with my first quote sandwich. Under his harsh leadership, Napoleon convinces the lower animals on the farm that, there's my bridge, my context, my description of where my quote is coming from, and then a very short quote. The truest happiness lay in working hard and living frugally. Orwell, page 49. That's my quote, and it includes the quotation marks, the quote, and the citation. Then, this is an example of, and then whatever that comes after that would be my analysis, or my reasoning, or my interpretation, or my explanation. In this orange 2-sentence reasoning, I'm going to describe how this quote shows that the pigs are manipulative and dishonest, and maybe even talk about propaganda. That's all for this evening. We're going to RQS our notes next